With the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, the Oklahoma legislature is still needing to meet to figure out things like an annual state budget and moving money to meet the ongoing needs of the COVID crisis. Josh Cockroft joins us this week to discuss what's happening at the legislature right now.
So let's get all the latest updates with Josh.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. You are tuned in to episode 118 of Talking Real. We are still working remotely in our respective individual studios, and we've got a guest on the show today. But first, Nabil, how are you today?
Doing well as always. I've been like moving around my apartment, switching up workspaces, so
You gotta keep it interesting. You gotta go to the coffee shop in the kitchen, and then out to the patio.
The cafe in the guest room. Yeah.
Right. We've also got Josh Cockroft on the line today. And Josh, how are you?
Gentlemen, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're excited to bring you back on. We haven't had a legislative update in a while because we haven't really been having a legislative session. So it's been kind of a weird time going on.
Yeah, it has. It's been probably, I've been in and around politics for a while now and have seen quite a few legislative sessions. This is by far the weirdest one. So just trying to, as we all are, trying to adapt with the strange times we're in.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to bring you back on because legislative session is kicking back off. The legislature is back. They are picking out what their priority legislation is going to be, and they, at least presumably through the month of May, we have a regular session and I think a special session going on, and it's all just a little convoluted. So we wanted you to come in and help us understand exactly what's going on right now and maybe what we'll look forward to seeing over the next month or so. So just give us kind of an update of like where we are today as far as the legislature just picking back up where things have left off now that we're at a point where they've got to get back in there and get some work done.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the legislature's been on and off, mostly off since late March, when everything in Oklahoma kind of started to shut down through some executive orders from Governor Stitt. You had municipalities across the state issuing orders, restricting how large of a group of people could be together. There were a lot of health concerns, obviously, that have come from all of this. So the legislature left the Capitol in late March, and since that time, they've actually until this past Monday, have been out of session, not holding any official meetings, save a couple committee meetings, and about 2 days, a couple weeks ago, where they came in to deal with an executive order that Governor Stitt had issued. So no legislative work as far as committees, as far as floor work, bills moving through the process. Our OAR Government Affairs Committee meets every year, goes through a list of bills we want to track. We're looking at over 250 bills this year that we were watching and working on actively. And really, with all of this going on, a lot of that kind of went out the window because the legislature shifted their priorities to making sure that they were taking care of the bare necessities to keep the state running. So when they left in late March, they left with kind of the belief that they would only come back, one, if it was safe, or two, if there were pressing issues that the state needed to take care of. Part of that pressing issue look that they were looking at was our state budget. The Oklahoma legislature is only constitutionally obligated to do one thing every single year, and that's to pass a state budget. So they knew they had to, at the bare minimum, get that done. They have to pass a state budget so that state agencies can continue to run through the next fiscal year, that Oklahomans can get the services that they need from our state agencies. A couple weeks ago, like I mentioned, they came back in to deal with an executive order that basically enabled the executive branch to better move around some resources between state, county, and local jurisdictions to address the COVID-19 situation. So a lot to deal with our healthcare systems, making sure that there were people in the places that there needed to be people, resources in the places that there needed to be resources. But other than that, they haven't been in the Capitol. Now, that does not mean that they have stopped working because of that state budget that they have to work on every single year. They have continued to meet virtually, much like we're doing now from separate places across the metro area. They've met in separate places back home in their districts all across the state, working on what exactly that budget picture would look like, what they needed to do to, again, keep the state running for the next year. On top of that, they began identifying some high priority legislation that related either to COVID-19 and the state's response, or some issues that have come out of that to make sure that they're setting the state on a better path and a more stable path going forward. And so just yesterday, Monday, they came back in for the first time since March and began the regular session as well as a couple special sessions. So we're now in the second special session of the legislature, which can happen at the same time as the regular session. So they're working in both regular session and special session. The difference there is that at a special session, you have to deal with specific things that the governor puts forward to deal with. So you can't go outside the purview of what the governor's order may be. And so they're working with some of those executive orders that he called them back in for to make sure that those resources can be allocated across the state in a proper manner, as well as working through the budget process and some of those high priority issues.
I would say that it's weird that we're simultaneously in regular session and special session, but we've actually been through this very recently.
We've seen this before.
Yeah, this is nothing new. This is kind of just the way business has to be done right now. It's a regular thing. But so you mentioned the budget, and certainly that's a big issue. I know earlier they were having some back and forth about what that budget picture is going to look like, and it looks like we've had quite a bit of a revenue failure, that they had to get the equalization board together, and it was somewhere along the lines of $500 million revenue failure, I think, which has a reducing effect on the budget, plus the amount of money they're expecting going forward. I think I saw today they're planning somewhere around a $7.7 billion budget, which is, I think, a pretty sizable reduction from what we've had, in the last year or two.
Yeah, and there's been, shocker, I know, there's been some politics being played on both sides
No.
of yeah, I know. But there's been some politics on what exactly that number is. A couple weeks ago, we saw a tremendous decline in the oil and gas markets, and that has a tremendous effect on Oklahoma's budget because we're such a energy reliant state. And the Board of Equalization met, which has to certify exactly what the legislature has to work with for the next fiscal year. And they met and they came up with that $1.3 billion deficit going into next year that the legislature has to figure out a way to at least bring us up to level. It has to be balanced. We do have that requirement in the state. We can't run on a deficit. Thankfully, we can't run on a deficit because in the last few years we would have been in a real pickle, especially seeing what our economy has done in the last couple of years. But I mean, it's been difficult for legislators because they started this session looking at probably an $85 million surplus, and now because of everything that's happened with the economy and the things that COVID-19 has inflicted upon our economy, we're now looking at a $1.3 billion shortfall. So that has tremendous consequences, that creates tremendous uncertainty, not only for lawmakers, but for Oklahomans as a whole. So the legislature has now began the process of addressing how they fill that budget hole. And through the bills that have been introduced just yesterday, and they're moving through the process throughout the next couple weeks, What we're looking at is about a reduction of 4% to every state agency in appropriated funds. There are a few agencies that are receiving less than that 4% cut. There's a few that actually see an increase just because there were specific needs in those agencies. For example, Medicaid has been a huge issue, and healthcare outcomes. You see a pretty good bump in the appropriations that are given towards some of our healthcare agencies because of implementing that system, implementing Medicaid expansion because of the response to COVID-19. And so there's quite an array of percentages, both positive and negative, across the budget. But all of those pull together to make a balanced budget. That's the appropriate side. You also have to realize that our state also deals in apportioned numbers, and so those numbers aren't dealt with by the legislature. Those are monies that are specifically dedicated to specific places.
This is
and
what
so
people call like off the top money, right? That like
correct
money comes in and there's no choice in it. And that's actually like 2/3 of our budget. Is that right?
I think it's
a large portion.
It's a little, yeah, it's over 50% of our budget is not even touched by the legislature. And, there's been a lot of discussion in years past if that's a good thing, if that's a bad thing. You're protecting certain areas, but at the same time, you're leaving the legislature with not as much to deal with. So if you look at the overall budget, the budget for the entire state is around $22 billion. But the legislature only has about that $7 to $8 billion that they deal with every single year. So it's been a process of just trying to figure out how they go about addressing that shortfall and try to set us up for success in the future. Because, every indication and every hope is that the economy sees a rebound after we're through all of this. But there's definitely some difficult decisions that have to be made by the legislature.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope. And obviously it's going to be a little slow to recover, right? It's not going to just bounce back immediately.
Right. And, that's the difficult part when you are in that elected office. You're not only making decisions for today, you're making decisions that can have a direct correlation on tomorrow. And that's the decisions that our lawmakers are having to make. There may be some areas that are being cut where they absolutely don't want to be cut or don't need to be cut, because we've seen, almost a decade of cuts before this. We had one good year last year of a surplus and funding. But you have to make those decisions not only for today, but also for tomorrow, and hope that you're setting the state on a better path.
Yeah, and especially tough right now to decide for tomorrow, especially not knowing what that's going to look like, because this is something that we've never experienced before.
And I think so. You mentioned all the appropriated dollars, and just sort of as a educational aside, I guess a lot of our realtor members obviously deal with the real estate commission a lot, and so they may be asking, how's this going to affect them? And really, from a financial standpoint, it shouldn't affect them much, except that we could have a reduction in renewals or something like that if there's some issue there. But because the real estate commission is a non-appropriated agency, they are funded off of annual or every 3-year renewals and new licenses and those kinds of things. So they don't actually get any money out of that $7 to $8 billion that's appropriated by the legislature. All theirs comes in through fees. So at least to the extent that the agency that we're most commonly dealing with, and there's a number of those out there that primarily deal in licensing and things like that are just fee driven. And so those agencies, we're probably not going to see quite the same financial hit immediately, though in the long term, it'll just kind of remain to be seen what that ends up looking like on the bigger economic picture and how that may affect fees coming in and things like that. But at least in terms of that, 4% cut you mentioned, that wouldn't be like a direct 4% cut to the real estate commission as well. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there.
For sure. You're 100% right. Something that you do have to be careful of with non-appropriated agencies is they have what are called revolving funds, where all of these fines and fees and everything that is paid in through that agency, like from our real estate members, all of those go into what are called a revolving fund. And the legislature actually does have the ability and the authority to come in and take some of that money. Can't take a certain type of revolving fund. It can't take over a certain amount out of those revolving funds every time. But the legislature does have the ability to sweep some of those accounts. And so that's where it can start to get a little dicey for a non-appropriated agency. Now, I have not, in particular, the numbers were just some precursory numbers were released yesterday. I have not seen some of the numbers as far as what the legislature is taking from revolving funds, and if it does not take some of the funds from the real estate commission. But that's something, to your point, you've got to be careful of when you're looking at the overall picture. Yeah, they're not necessarily taking anything from appropriated funds, but are they using any of the revolving funds to help alleviate some of those costs and cuts for other areas of state government? So it's a little bit of I hate to use the term of a trick, but it's a little bit of a approach that the legislature can use to make sure that they're balancing that state budget, is to use some of those revolving funds.
Absolutely. And that does happen every year.
It does.
So
it does.
Aside from, obviously the budget is going to be the biggest focus over the next few weeks. Some specific COVID related things, obviously the special session dealing with the governor's use of funds and being able to transfer funds. And I know there's some back and forth and some politics going on there about, how they want that documented and everything else. But so aside from specific COVID related issues and budget issues, have you seen anything else that looks like big, interesting priority legislation the legislature is going to be looking at?
It's going to be light. They are going to take a look at some higher priority issues throughout the rest of the session, but you're going to see a dramatic decrease in what they traditionally are looking at during this time of the year. They dealt yesterday with a couple healthcare related issues, and that's where I think a lot of the policy is going to be focused, is on the healthcare side of things, because of the Medicaid expansion that's being proposed, making sure that the healthcare authority, that the Oklahoma Health Department are prepared for that, as well as making sure that the issues that have come up through this COVID-19 situation and depleting some of their resources, making sure that they're set up for success in the future. Those are the issues that they're mainly focusing on. And as far as a list that I could give you of these are the 5 things that they're going to look at the rest of the year, I just simply don't have that. And honestly, the legislature doesn't necessarily have that at this point, because they've been away for almost a month and a half and dealing from a distance. Now that they're back in the building, they are really working on narrowing down what those issues are. We traditionally see about 2,500 bills filed every year. So far this year, they've only passed onto the governor's desk. They've passed less than 100 onto the governor's desk. We normally see around 300 to 400 to the governor's desk. They have to be adjourned in regular session by the last Friday in May. So, the particular issues that they're going to be working on, it's to be determined, since they've just gotten back and they are having to do the exact same thing that we all are doing and trying to find out how to operate in this new normal. There's definitely some issues that they're going to look at, but a lot of that's going to be on the healthcare side, where I think Realtor members need to be paying attention, where we all need to be paying attention, is as we move past this legislative session. We have seen, not just here in Oklahoma, but we've seen nationwide, and working with the National Association of Realtors, there are going to be issues that come from all of this COVID-19 situation when it comes to eviction and in property management and landlord-tenant laws. We're going to see, I believe, and a lot of other people believe, that we're going to see a lot of things moving into next year that we've got to really be on top of and communicate and educate with our lawmakers and their staff as we move forward, because they're getting the phone calls, the frustrations, just like we're hearing those frustrations, and we have some of those frustrations ourselves as realtor members. So it's going to be interesting as we go into 2021 session, what some of those issues might be.
And that's kind of what I was going to ask. Like all these bills that obviously the legislature wasn't able to get to this year, how do those transfer over to next year? Do they have to go through a whole process again, or are they automatically, I mean, this is a weird situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. In Oklahoma, we are on a 2-year cycle, legislative cycle. So the good news is that we are on the second year of that 2-year legislative cycle. So next year, it doesn't matter what wasn't heard this year. Next year, everything has to be introduced brand new. So everything that has gone through the process, let's say it's gone through the House, but it hasn't gone through the Senate this year, it's not eligible to go on to next year. Now, if it had gone through the House but not the Senate last year, it was eligible to be heard this year in the Senate because it's the second year of a 2-year cycle. But next year, we wipe the slate clean and everything has to start from scratch. Everything has to start at the beginning, which can be good. That can also be bad.
Right.
So I want to mention too, I mean, you said what should realtors be looking at going forward? And obviously here at the state association, we watch everything that goes on at the state legislature and statewide policy making. And NAR watches everything that goes on at the national level. And I think now more than ever, it's important for realtor members to also start getting even more engaged at the local level, city council, county commissioner type level, and which people should be doing through their local associations, because we have seen, even here in Oklahoma, kind of a divergence of interests at the state level and at certain local levels. And so we need to make sure that while the state association, we're carrying forward our message to the state legislature, we need to be doing the same thing to mayors, city council members, county commissioners, because they've kind of been all over the place. Some have been much stricter than the state, and there's been some battles that are going on. In fact, we just saw where in the city of Norman, we had some, personal care, so like hairstylists and things that sued the city because they were trying to restrict them from opening, whereas the state said they could open, and they had to go down to the court and get that kind of figured out. And so making sure that realtors are staying very engaged at that local level, I think is going to be increasingly important, because I would predict that not only would we see changes in landlord tenant and those kinds of things, but having a lot of changes that could be proposed in city ordinances and things like that could also be another prime area that's much harder to get a track on because it's so local. And so really getting engaged there is going to be super important going forward.
People forget that most of the decision making does not happen in Washington, D.C. and in Oklahoma City. Most of the decision making that affect our daily lives happens at your county courthouse or your local municipality, in your city councils, town councils, the boards that are under those jurisdictions. That's where a lot of policy is made. That's where a lot of precedent is also set with that policy. And so you're 100% right. Now more than ever, it's time to get engaged at the local level. If you do not know who your mayor is, if you don't know who your city council member is, if you do not have a relationship with your county commissioner, that's where we could run into some problems later on. And so it's a process of building that relationship. Politics is all about relationships. Once you have a relationship, then you can educate. It's not the other way around. Once you've established a relationship and you've established a reputation, that's when you're able to be effective. And so 100% right. And I would encourage every one of our realtor members to get engaged at the local level, from the school board all the way to the county courthouse. Our responsibility is to watch that stuff that happens at 23rd and Lincoln in Oklahoma City, and NAR is watching the things that happen in Washington, D.C. Our local associations are the ones, and the local realtor members in your community have to make sure that we're being diligent and vigilant to watch and educate and build those relationships at the local level, so that we can continue to see the success that we've had in our state, so that we can continue to build the influence that we have at the federal level, at the state level, and then most importantly, I believe at the local level, because those ordinances, your state legislator has very little to do with, little to nothing to do with. So, build that relationship, begin that education, so that we can have even larger of an influence at the local level.
Well said.
I think that is an excellent note to wrap us up here for another legislative update. Again, Josh, thank you so much for coming on, and we hope that all of our listeners out there will share this with somebody that is also in the real estate industry, so that they can get an update on what's going on and see what kind of things are going to be coming down the road that we need to be watching out for.
For sure. And I'm glad, Josh, you mentioned 23rd and Lincoln, because we almost went through an entire legislative update episode without saying that.
I've got to keep some sense of normalcy here.
Well, once again, we hope you all are subscribed. Please jump on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a rating, leave us a review. That's incredibly helpful. And again, please do share this with a friend. And until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.